Did you know there's a Filipino family in New York that owns 34 ports across 20 countries? Is untouchable by the ICE, and the family head has become the richest person in the Philippines with a $16.5 billion fortune? But hey, they are just one of the 8 powerful Filipino families in New York we're breaking down today. And before we get into the list, I want you to know one thing. The family sitting at number 1 will genuinely blow your mind. Let's begin. Number 8. The Tsai siblings, or the SM Empire's New York institution. We open with a family that turned a single shoe store in Manila into one of Southeast Asia's largest conglomerates, and then quietly embedded themselves into the financial infrastructure of New York without most people noticing. The Tsai siblings, named Teresita, Elizabeth, Henry Jr., Hans, Herbert, and Harley, all collectively hold a net worth somewhere between $11.8 and $13 billion. 6 individuals with one shared empire built by their father, Henry Tsai Sr., who started in 1958 with a shop called Shoe Mart and a singular obsession with understanding how retail actually works. He studied American mall culture extensively, benchmarking his eventual supermall concept against what he observed in the United States. The idea that SM malls, which are now among the largest retail spaces on Earth, were partly inspired by visits to American shopping centers is one of those details that reframes the whole story. In New York, the family's presence is institutional rather than residential. Their primary footprint runs through capital markets. BDO Unibank, one of the Philippines' largest banks, maintains deep relationships with New York-based investment banks and financial regulators. The siblings guide overall strategy from board seats, while outside professionals manage daily operations, a structure that has kept the empire stable through the inevitable complications of a 6-way family inheritance. The succession model itself is worth noting. The Tsai children were trained inside the business from age 13. Teresita Tsai Coson was running the first SM department store at 22. 2 months after the declaration of martial law in 1972. The deliberate choice to install a 22-year-old daughter at the helm of a flagship operation during a national crisis tells you everything about how this family thinks under pressure. Teresita has since appeared on Fortune's 50 Most Powerful Women list. The grandchildren are now in New York, attending elite universities, building the financial networks that will carry the 3rd generation forward. Quietly, methodically, and almost entirely below the radar of New York's social press, the Tsai empire keeps compounding. Now, 7 families remain, and the next one operates not from boardrooms, but from ports, 34 of them, across 20 countries. Number 7. Enrique Razon Jr., the logistics king. Enrique Razon is, as of the 2026 Forbes rankings, the wealthiest individual in the Philippines. Net worth, $16.5 billion. And the foundation of that fortune is something most billionaires don't build on: container terminals. International Container Terminal Services, Inc., or ICTSI, manages 34 ports and terminals across 20 countries. It is, by any reasonable measure, a piece of the backbone of global trade. Every time goods move between continents and pass through one of his terminals, Razon's infrastructure is part of that transaction. The business requires constant engagement with capital markets, which means New York is a permanent fixture in his operational calendar. His lifestyle matches the scale. Razon is a licensed pilot who operates a fleet of Gulfstream aircraft, the G650ER being his long-haul instrument of choice, connecting his hubs in Manila, Europe, and the Americas. He's a member of the U.S. Philippine Society, a high-level advocacy group that places Philippine business leadership in direct conversation with American political and economic decision-makers. Golf is another axis of his influence. He chairs Pilipinas Golf Tournaments Incorporated, which has become a vehicle for both diplomacy and brand building at the elite level. The recent surge in his net worth came from the successful launch of a second Solaire casino complex through Bloomberry Resorts, alongside record-breaking profits from port operations globally. He also broke even in the first year on a $1 billion casino project, a figure that sounds extraordinary until you understand that Razon has been reading infrastructure demand curves for 3 generations. His family has been in marine cargo handling for over 90 years. This isn't new money learning the game. This is a dynasty that is the game, from ports to Park Avenue. The next family represents something rarer than new money. Genuinely old money, handled with the kind of quiet sophistication that only 190 years of institutional discipline produces. Number 6. The Zobel de Ayala family. Old money on Wall Street. If the Tsai family represents scale and the Razon family represents infrastructure, the Zobel de Ayalas represent something else entirely. The long arc of institutional prestige maintained across 8 generations without the whole thing unraveling. That is considerably harder than it sounds. Ayala Corporation is 190 years old. The family's net worth sits at approximately $3.4 billion, which is modest relative to some others on this list. But the number misrepresents the depth of their position. Ayala's tentacles run through Philippine banking via BPI, real estate via Ayala Land, and digital solutions across the region. In New York, their presence is defined less by assets and more by deliberate professional formation. Mariana Zobel de Ayala, an 8th-generation heir, spent her early career as an equity analyst at J.P. Morgan in New York. That's not a gap year or a resume line. That's the family's explicit philosophy in action. Immerse the next generation in the most competitive financial market on Earth before entrusting them with a 190-year-old conglomerate. Jaime Alfonso Zobel de Ayala, named Executive Director in 2025, followed the same global finance training track. Socially, the Zobels move in the kind of New York circles that don't make page 6. Museum board meetings, gallery openings, the Synergos Global Philanthropist Circle, where Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala sits alongside other leading global family dynasties. Their New York residences are reportedly in white-glove co-ops on the Upper East Side, the kind of buildings where the board interview is more rigorous than most job applications. Understated, precise, and completely intentional. That's old money established. Now, a woman who walked into a billion-dollar crisis with no business experience and didn't flinch once. Number 5. Loida Nicholas Lewis. The matriarch of Fifth Avenue. There are people who inherit empires and maintain them. And then there's Loida Nicholas Lewis, who inherited a crisis and turned it into a legacy. When her husband, Reginald F. Lewis, the first Black American to build a billion-dollar business, died in 1993, Loida was left with TLC Beatrice International, a sprawling, complicated, multi-continent food conglomerate that was losing direction. She had no formal business training. She stepped in as CEO in 1994 anyway, stabilized the company, and became the first Asian American woman to lead a billion-dollar enterprise. Her personal net worth today sits at approximately $600 million. The New York life she's built around that legacy is worth examining in detail. Her former residence, a 7,000-square-foot, 16-room duplex at 834 Fifth Avenue, was one of the most exclusive addresses on Manhattan's Museum Mile. She later transitioned to a penthouse on the Upper East Side, chosen, by her own account, after she spotted an Alexander Archipenko torso sculpture in the building that matched one owned by her late husband. That is how Loida Nicholas Lewis makes decisions, through culture, symbolism, and an almost architectural sense of meaning. The penthouse itself features gold leaf ceilings in the library and foyer. She also owns a property in East Hampton, notable for being among the first homes owned by an African-American family in that area, a fact that carries historical weight beyond real estate. Politically, she co-founded the National Federation of Filipino American Associations to amplify the diaspora's voice in national politics. She hosts cultivation dinners, intimate gatherings of arts patrons, political figures, and cultural leaders, at a regularity that has made her salon one of the quiet fixtures of New York's serious social landscape. Before any of this, she worked as a paralegal and eventually a lawyer for the INS, fighting for the rights of the poor in East Harlem before she even held U.S. citizenship. The story, from start to finish, is almost implausibly complete. Now, we move from Fifth Avenue salons to Times Square signage. And our next entry is a man who put a Filipino brand at the literal crossroads of the world. Number 4. Tony Tan Caktiong, the Smiling Bee at Times Square. In 2022, Jollibee opened its flagship location at 1500 Broadway, right in the heart of Times Square, adjacent to the Good Morning America studios, on what is effectively the most visible commercial real estate on Earth. For Tony Tan Coctiong, it was the culmination of a vision that started with a small family ice cream business in the Philippines in the 1970s. His net worth today is $2.9 billion. Jollibee Foods Corporation now operates globally, and the Times Square location, a 7,127 square foot lease spanning ground floor and basement, with high-visibility LED signage facing the ball drop corridor, is its most deliberate statement yet. The menu was calibrated specifically for American mainstream tastes, adding items like cheddar mac and cheese and mandarin orange salad alongside the Filipino classics that built the brand's cult following in the diaspora. The strategy isn't just nostalgia marketing, it's an active attempt to compete with the world's largest fast food chains on their home turf. The mascot, the Jollibee Bee, always smiling, was chosen by Tan Coctiong specifically to represent the hard work and happiness of the Filipino working class. It is now an IPO-PHL registered intellectual property mark and one of the most recognizable brand characters in Southeast Asia. Ernst & Young named him World Entrepreneur of the Year. The business remains deeply family-oriented. His brother Ernesto Tan Mantiong serves as CEO, and his 3 children hold significant leadership roles within JFC. He's also been acquiring American brands, Smashburger being among them, to diversify the portfolio and establish JFC as a genuine player in the American fast food landscape rather than just a diaspora favorite. The ambition is clear, the infrastructure is being assembled, and Times Square was just the opening move, not the closing one. And now, the next name on this list built something considerably more controversial than the Coctiongs, and considerably larger. Number 3. Manuel Villar, The Rags to Riches Empire. Manuel Villar's biography reads like it was written specifically to be dramatized. Born in Tondo, one of Manila's most densely populated and economically marginalized districts, to a family that sold fish and shrimp, rose to become, at his peak in early 2025, the wealthiest person in the Philippines with an estimated net worth of $18.3 billion. That arc, from fish vendor to Forbes Top 10, is genuinely extraordinary by any measure. His vehicle is Villarland, formerly Golden MV Holdings, currently constructing a 3,500-hectare master-planned community south of Manila called Villar City, a development explicitly benchmarked against global urban planning standards. In New York, his team studies American real estate models and consumer patterns as reference points for the kind of integrated city building that Villar is attempting at a scale few developers anywhere in the world have attempted. But 2025 brought the kind of complication that comes with building at that speed. Villar faced regulatory scrutiny from the SEC over an alleged $17 billion net profit inflation, stemming from a property revaluation gain that external auditors subsequently rejected. At peak, his market capitalization reached 1.5 trillion pesos. Post-scrutiny, estimates of his actual net worth ranged between $3.1 and $8.4 billion, a spread so wide it tells its own story about the opacity of the valuation. What remains unambiguous is his political infrastructure. His son Mark and daughter Camille are both sitting members of the Philippine Senate. His retail and media expansion, moving into free-to-air television and casino development, is diversifying the empire beyond property in ways that suggest Villar is already thinking about what comes after the current cycle. The man built over 200,000 homes. Whatever the current valuation says, that footprint doesn't evaporate. Let's now move from mega developments to a very different kind of empire. One built stitch by stitch in a Fifth Avenue showroom by a woman who was once the first female VP at Merrill Lynch. Number 2. Josie Natori, The High Fashion Bridge. Josie Natori occupies a position on this list that no one else does. She built her own brand from scratch in an industry that is notoriously difficult to survive in, and turned it into a $150 million annual revenue business sold through Bergdorf Goodman and Saks Fifth Avenue. The Natori Company was founded in 1977. It is still family-owned. And it started because of a single hand-embroidered blouse from the Philippines that Notori brought to a Bloomingdale's buyer, who told her it would sell better as a top than as a nightgown. She pivoted, built a lingerie empire, then expanded into ready-to-wear, home, and fragrance, all of it carrying an aesthetic that consciously bridges Filipino craft traditions with New York luxury sensibility, which is, when you think about it, a genuinely rare and valuable position to occupy in the fashion world. Her New York life is a physical extension of that aesthetic. She and her husband Ken own an entire floor of an Upper East Side apartment building, 5,000 square feet, featuring a music room with 2 grand pianos, 16th century Buddha artwork, and textiles from her own brand woven into the design. She was a classical pianist before she was a fashion executive, and the apartment doesn't let you forget it. Her Westchester estate in Pound Ridge is perhaps even more considered, a Japanese-inspired structure built with flamed timber and sliding glass walls, surrounded by Zen gardens designed to dissolve the boundary between the interior and the landscape. She's worked with architect Calvin Tsao on 3 of her homes. These are not decorated spaces. They are designed ones with the same level of intentionality she brings to a collection. Before fashion, she was the first female vice president in investment banking at Merrill Lynch. The pivot from Wall Street to lingerie remains one of the more quietly audacious career moves in New York business history. Her son Kenneth now serves as president of the company, driving digital growth. The brand, like its founder, keeps evolving, but never loses the thread back to where it started. And then there's number 1. Not the oldest family on this list or even the largest fortune, but arguably the most consequential individual story, and the one that most directly redefined what Filipino success looks like in New York. Number 1. Giovanni Corpus, the new guard of Billionaires Row. Giovanni Corpus doesn't fit the profile of the other names on this list. He didn't inherit an empire. He wasn't sent to New York by a family dynasty to build relationships on their behalf. He is the child of Filipino immigrants who grew up with modest means and built, through finance, a position that now places him on 57th Street, Billionaires Row, as an investor and operator. He has managed over $1 billion in assets across investment banking and private equity. His most recent and most symbolic move was backing the Yawning Cobra Bar on 57th Street, on a block that sits between some of the most expensive residential towers ever constructed. The investment is, by his own framing, not just a financial play. It is a statement about Filipino presence in a corridor of the city that has historically belonged almost exclusively to a very specific kind of old wealth. His investment philosophy, trust as much as numbers, reflects something specific to the Filipino cultural context. The concept of hospitality, of relationship building as a serious business tool, is something Corpus has deliberately brought into his deal-making. He structures complex syndications and capital raises, but the competitive edge he talks about most often is the quality of the relationships built around them. What lands him at number 1 on this list isn't the size of his balance sheet. Several families above him hold considerably more. It's what his position represents in the broader arc of Filipino wealth in New York. The Tsai siblings institutionalized a legacy. The Zobels professionalized their heirs. Lloyda Lewis held an empire together by sheer force of will. Corpus built from nothing, in finance, and planted a flag on the most expensive block in Manhattan. He's also committed to mentoring the next generation of Filipino-American financiers, actively working to dismantle what he calls the tired blueprint of service-oriented roles as the default trajectory for Filipino immigrants in America. Financial literacy programs, fund structures that create jobs within the diaspora, and a very deliberate public presence that says, "This is what Filipino success looks like in high finance." It's worth noting that the history of Filipino wealth in New York has a darker chapter running underneath all of this. During the 1980s, the Marcos family acquired several Manhattan skyscrapers through coded intermediaries. The Crown Building purchased under the alias Farragamo, 40 Wall Street under Bridgetown, the Herald Center under Midtown Cement. Properties worth hundreds of millions, concealed behind layers of corporate opacity. That legacy, the association between Filipino elite capital and institutional concealment, is precisely what families like Corpus, the Zobels, and Notori have spent decades working against. Transparency, governance, and visibility are the deliberate counter-program. Corpus on Billionaires Row is the current chapter of that story, and it reads considerably better than the last one. So those were our 8 Filipino families, all in one city of New York. And a collective story that runs from a shoe store in Manila to a penthouse on 5th Avenue, from 34 ports across 20 countries to a flagship in Times Square, and from the halls of JP Morgan to the corridors of Billionaires Row. Which family's story surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. And for more such interesting peeks into how global wealth is regulating, subscribe to Global Status, because we drop videos like this every day and you're genuinely missing out.